And they're debating the huge question of slavery and then states' rights. Is the idea that it's up to the states to decide whether they should have slavery or not.
Yeah. Lincoln is saying, no, we have to keep having this out. This is the issue of our day. Not go to war with each other, but persuade each other.
Chris, today we're looking at the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and in particular the final two, numbers 6 and 7, out of 7 debates.
Yeah.
So maybe just a quick word on some historical context here. So these were held, the debates were held in the late 1850s, just prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, between Abraham Lincoln, who had done some governmental time, so to speak, as a politician.
Congress.
And then on the other hand, you've got Stephen Douglas. And they're vying for the senatorial seat in Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah, Douglas is the incumbent, right? And this is, I think, Lincoln's second attempt at Congress. He was a representative, is that right?
He was a representative.
Yeah, 1 term or something like that. But
That's
now he's
right.
running for Senate to unseat Stephen Douglas. Yeah.
And Douglas is running as a Democrat,
Yeah.
Lincoln as a Republican.
Yeah, newly founded party, right?
That's right.
Or newly founded, I guess.
Yeah.
Instituted party.
Yeah. And so these are all taking place in Illinois, and I want to say largely southern Illinois. We might have more to say about this later, but the immediate result of the Lincoln-Douglas debates is that Lincoln wins the popular vote,
Yeah.
but not the important vote, which
Yeah,
is the state legislature.
Yeah.
And Douglas wins that contest, and so he becomes the senator.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't until the early 20th century that the constitutional amendment said the senator was elected by popular vote, right? So this is back in the day where the state legislature actually has the final say, right?
Yeah, so I guess that was a more one other sharp divide between the way in which a member of the House was elected versus a member of the Senate.
Yeah.
Lincoln, of course, ends up running for president in 1860, not too far after these debates, and actually beats Douglas by quite a bit. So in the short term, Douglas wins. You might say in the longer term, obviously, Lincoln wins.
Yeah. That's because Lincoln had the beard when he ran for presidency.
Undoubtedly.
Didn't have it back then. Yeah.
So that's the context, and they're debating, among other things, the huge question of slavery, and then states' rights. And in some way, their respective positions end up emphasizing those two issues.
Yeah.
And these are issues that in some way funnel all the way back to the founding of the country. So why don't we get into the debates themselves and think about the question, what is the key issue for each of these two men?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing if they're agreeing on what the main issue is, but they have a different interpretation or a different approach to it. It's something else entirely if what's really at the heart of their respective positions is something distinct.
Yeah.
That they're trying to convince, they're each trying to convince the electorate of.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll take a first stab at that. It seems like the concrete circumstances that they're both arguing about, which is maybe distinct from the principle at work, but the circumstance is about whether or not territories, right, aspiring states, right, should be allowed to be slave states, or I should say slave territories, right? Because there had been something called the Missouri Compromise, probably 40 years or so before this, right, where they had said, where an act of Congress, I think, established a certain latitude, north latitude, 36.5 degrees, something like that, beyond which no territory, future state, I should say, would be allowed to have slaves, right, to be slaves-holding territories. And that had been overturned recently, both by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, I think, which was maybe just a few years before the debates, and the Dred Scott decision, which was maybe a year before the debate, that said that the compromise was unconstitutional. That's what the Dred Scott case decided, and on the principle that the federal government has no business making laws pertaining to the territories or states, right? Or pertaining to slavery, I should say, right?
Yeah, can't, specifically Dred Scott saying the federal government can't exclude
You can't prohibit,
slavery
yeah,
from territories.
yeah, right.
And isn't it right that the Missouri Compromise, so yes, above this parallel, there's no slavery, but that's within a certain, is it within the segment of the land that's occupied by the Louisiana Purchase?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right,
Yeah,
so it doesn't stretch out all the way
to the coast. Yeah,
coast, yeah.
Of course, that's not even to the coast. Not even territory yet, right? American territory yet. I think. I'm not sure.
At the time of the Missouri Compromise.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. But yeah, they just received the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon, I guess, or bought it from him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they just projected this straight line, this horizontal, or I should say, north-south latitude line, and imagined that beyond that, no slavery would be allowed up north. I guess north of that line. Yeah.
And there was something about the Missouri Compromise that you might say is, at the time, worked as a compromise, partly because it extends a kind of logic that you can see all the way back in the minds of the founders of the country.
Yeah.
Right? Namely that there's a sense in the founding documents we don't like slavery.
Yeah, we're kind of embarrassed by it. Yeah.
Yes, but it is a reality, and we have to accommodate it, but we don't want to positively promulgate it.
Yeah, promote it. Yeah. Yeah, the compromise, if I remember right, is that Missouri would be allowed to become a state. It was a territory, become a state and a slaveholding state, right? With the understanding that that produces 2 Senate votes, right, for the slaveholding states. And at the same time, Maine, which was like somehow dividing itself from Massachusetts, would also become a state. And that's obviously a free territory. So the understanding was that these 2 can come in, but it doesn't upset the balance of the Senate, if you will, right? Because there's 2, you might say, abolitionist-friendly states and 2 slaveholding-friendly votes, I should say, for one for each of those 2, or 2 for each of those states. So that was a compromise. Even though I think it's right that Missouri is actually above the line that's projected, the latitude line. So it was an exception of sorts.
Right.
But in fact, the 36 degrees, I want to say, line goes just underneath Missouri. But going forward, nothing of that high latitude would be allowed in as a slaveholding territory.
Exactly. Yeah. At the same time, the Missouri Compromise sort of maybe makes almost too explicit this notion that, well, the way forward could be a kind of continually equal balance of slave states and non-slave states. That is to say, it really forces the issue of a growing division within the fabric of the country at large.
It sort of institutionalizes the division into north and south, right?
Yeah. So we've got the Missouri Compromise, but then we've got, as you were mentioning, the Dred Scott decision, which comes about maybe 20 years later, but still before these debates, which says that, no African can be considered, no person of immediate African descent can be considered a citizen in the United States, and that, across the board, the federal government cannot prohibit slavery in any territory, which is a repudiation of the Missouri Compromise.
Yeah.
And of course, that kind of decision gives a lot of fuel for Douglas.
Yeah.
Right, at least when it comes to the slavery issue.
Yeah, I think that's right, and but it's also what provokes the existence of the since, as I mentioned, it provokes the creation of the Republican Party, which was defining itself in reaction to with the desire of overturning the Dred Scott decision.
Yeah, and Lincoln is able to pose a very difficult question to Douglas because of the Dred Scott decision, right? So on the one hand, Douglas is all about states' rights. And I guess we should say that clearly, that the key principle that Douglas is really relying on and fostering in his stance is the idea that it's up to the states to decide whether they should have slavery or not.
Yeah, it's they call the principle of popular sovereignty, and it's even, I think it occurs first or stated most explicitly in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which immediately precedes the Dred Scott. But Douglas was sort of a signatory. Maybe you should say he pushed that act to go through. So it's his principle from the beginning, I think, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or he's the proponent of it, I think. Yeah.
And then you have Lincoln,
On the other hand,
for whom the fundamental issue is precisely, human equality.
yeah,
Right. So slavery is the big issue, and that for Lincoln, the founders were never in a position of seeing slavery as a net gain, a positive good.
yeah,
And as you say, we're somewhat embarrassed by it,
Yeah.
and that the language of the Declaration extends to all human beings.
yeah.
And that
And it studiously avoids using the word slave or slavery, right? Yeah. And same with the Constitution, I guess. Yeah.
and he points to passages that speak of the blacks as persons. So Lincoln sees this as an issue that threatens to divide the country.
Yeah.
But he's able to pose this question to Douglas based on the Dred Scott decision. Okay, Douglas, you are in favor of states' rights, but the Dred Scott decision says that the government cannot exclude slavery.
Yeah.
So, Douglas, what if people in a territory were to decide that they didn't want slavery?
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
Yeah.
And that you can see how that's a kind of a trap question for Douglas, because on the one hand, it's the people deciding.
Yeah, popular sovereignty.
That's his popular sovereignty. But on the other hand, it's a decision that works against slavery.
Yeah.
That works against what the kind of thrust of the Dred Scott.
Yeah. Yeah, and is it right? I don't know if he ever directly answers the question. Do you have a sense of what his answer is?
Douglas, it comes down to what Lincoln calls the do nothing sovereignty. I
Yeah.
think maybe in the sixth debate, but Douglas essentially he doesn't really he doesn't answer the question directly because he can't.
Yeah.
But he ends up saying, well, look, people in states can create all sorts of laws and policies that would effectively make slavery, or I suppose you could say the prohibition of it, extremely difficult and uncomfortable, such that on a local level, no matter what a federal decision might be, the people could kind of strain against the decision and effectively nullify it, even if not legally.
Yeah.
And Lincoln calls out that
Yeah.
logic.
Yeah. Do you have a page you want to read along those lines?
I'm trying to find it here. Oh, here we go. Bottom of page 287. The truth about the matter is this: Judge Douglas has sung pans to his popular sovereignty doctrine until his Supreme Court, cooperating with him, has squatted his squatter sovereignty out. But he will keep up this species of humbuggery about squatter sovereignty. He has at last invented this sort of do-nothing sovereignty, that the people may exclude slavery by a sort of sovereignty that is exercised by doing nothing at all. Is not that running his popular sovereignty down awfully?
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that what he's saying there is that there's a kind of acknowledgement that, again, at the legal level, ultimately the people wouldn't be able to decide the issue.
Yeah.
Douglas has to recognize that because of the Dred Scott decision,
Yeah.
but he wants to say that people could cause trouble.
Yeah. Make it uncomfortable or something.
Yeah, that they could, that their sentiments and maybe popular movements could work to prevent
Yeah.
slavery or the I suppose the abolition of slavery in this particular.
Anti-slavery culture or something like that, but nothing illegal. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, nothing really politically decisive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why Lincoln's calling this out as a form of sovereignty, ultimately. That really it's really Douglas has to step away
Yeah.
in answer to Lincoln's question, has
Yeah.
to step away
Yeah,
from
not answer the question.
true upholding of popular sovereignty.
And help me understand that. So I'm still sort of puzzled by it. So it was what Lincoln's saying is your principle of popular sovereignty prevents even the territory, or even if it becomes a state, prevents it from ever forbidding slavery. So I thought the principle that's excluded by the Kansas-Nebraska Act and Dred Scott is just that the federal government can't be making laws along those lines. That popular law, I was assuming that popular law could allow it. I thought that's what Douglas was saying. Is that not right, you think?
I think that's right, but I think, isn't Lincoln asking about the case where, okay, prior to statehood,
Right, so just a territory.
Just territory,
Yeah.
the people were to decide to exclude slavery, then how should we regard their application
Yeah, okay.
to statehood?
Yeah, I see.
And because on the one hand, they popularly
determined,
would have decided slavery can't.
Yeah.
But
I
then,
see. So say that you're saying, like, imagining if they are south of that 36 degrees latitude, right? So they're in a place where it's not to be forbidden by the federal government. Could it be forbidden by the local government, right? Is that or
Yes.
the local popular vote plebiscite or something like that?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Douglas is a little bit ambiguous about that, I guess. He's also ambiguous, am I right about this? That Lincoln's trying to make the point that if what you're saying is right, Douglas, and the territories, say north of 36 degrees, right, anywhere in the territories, if any of them acquire enough slaveholding people, because you're allowed to take your property over state lines, that's sort of what Dred Scott decided, right?
Right.
Your slaves are your property, right? If you go into a territory that is currently has no, I don't know if you have laws exactly, but local ordinances in a territory that says that we don't allow slavery here. If a number of slaveholders from the South come up north, they could become the majority, and they could make that state or that territory into a slaveholding territory just by being the majority. And they could even, as the Dred Scott decision seems to allow, go back into states, right, with their territory. And if there's a majority of them, the free states could also be turned into slaveholding states, again, if just a number of them do it. Right? I think that's one of the threats that Lincoln sees in what has been decided in Dred Scott, for example, that this really makes it possible and feasible, we'll say, for the free states to become slaveholding states. In other words, for the dominion of slaveholding states. Right.
That's right. Yeah, and Douglas has a very interesting response to that concern on Lincoln's part, right? So Douglas says in response, well, Lincoln would have you sort of block off slavery from these free states, and even moving forward to prohibit slavery from these new territories that are applying for statehood. And so what's going to happen to the slaves? They're going to keep reproducing and multiplying. They won't have anywhere to go.
Yeah, it's a
and
great
so
line.
they'll lack food and they'll starve to death.
He's going to starve the Negro race, right?
Exactly.
Like that.
This Christian Abraham Lincoln, who's claiming to be anti-slavery or pro the African, is really going to be guilty of starving them.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could find it off the top of my head, but it's a funny passage, right? I think it's in the last debate where he says something like, or he implies at least, that societies grow, and therefore slave families and slaveholding families, if you want to call it that, grow as well. And so the slavery has to grow. It can't stay localized within the South, within the states. It has to reproduce. And if you put in these boundaries, while the reproduction is going to keep happening, you're effectively murdering all these people, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of a remarkable turning of the tables there.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
And there's something to it, I think, in the sense that Lincoln's not ashamed to admit that what we do want is slavery to die out, right? But not in the sense, he's obviously not saying what I just want to do is starve out the slaves. So this is, I think our pagination might be different, but this is in the sixth debate. The paragraph begins, Mr. Lincoln there told his abolition friends. I don't know if you can find that.
Okay.
But, I'll just read it to you. He says, how then does Lincoln propose to save the Union unless by compelling all the states to become free so that the House shall not be divided against itself, right? He's using that line from one of Lincoln's speeches, the famous House divided line. He intends making them all free. He will preserve the Union in that way. And yet, he is not going to interfere with slavery anywhere it now exists. He's saying that sarcastically, because Lincoln keeps saying, I'm not going to interfere with slavery where it now exists, right? He says, and how is he going to bring it about, the elimination of slavery? Why, he will agitate. He will induce the North to agitate until the South shall be worried out and forced to abolish slavery. Skipping down a little bit. It says, when he thus gets it confined, right, such that it can't expand into the territory, and surrounded so that it cannot spread, the natural laws of increase will go on until the Negroes will be so plenty that they cannot live on the soil. He will hem them in until starvation seizes them, and by starving them to death, he will put slavery in the course of ultimate extinction. Right? So extinguishing slavery by extinguishing the slaves, right? Let me just read the last line. It says, if he is not going to interfere with slavery in the states, but intends to interfere and prohibit it in the territories, and thus smother slavery out, it naturally follows that he can extinguish it only by extinguishing the Negro race, for his policy would drive them to starvation. This is the humane and Christian remedy that he proposes for the great crime of slavery.
Yeah, that's interesting because Douglas is you can see there, Douglas either doesn't understand or is deliberately misrepresenting the trajectory of Lincoln's thinking, right? Because Lincoln is ultimately not imagining just a future where we continue again to grow the free states and the slave states.
And they stay in some sort of tension of equilibrium, right?
Right. But rather, as you've said, Lincoln sees slavery as simply a wrong, and a wrong that the founders were aware of, and that they had already set in motion a path for the country by which the logic of which would see slavery gradually undone entirely.
Yeah, right.
In light of that, it's interesting if we think about Lincoln's side a little more for a minute here, that he doesn't see blacks as simply equal to whites.
Yeah, not unqualifiedly.
That he'll acknowledge in stark and for us sort of disturbing terms ways in which blacks are neither socially nor intellectually on par with whites. And that he doesn't want to see it that way. But that they are human beings. And so under the principles of the Declaration, they are every bit as entitled to political liberty as whites are.
Although political liberty, even that in a constrained sense, because he does say, I'm not in favor of giving them the right to vote or participate in government, right? But they deserve to be free, which means not be slaves, right? To be able to make decisions about their own lives. And certainly by our better understanding of things now, I think we'd say, yes, okay, so he's imagining a second-class citizen, right? But he is still imagining them as free citizens, right? He says, like you said, those rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that are mentioned in the Declaration, those should belong to them, as long as liberty is not understood as active participation in government, right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. So it's a very, so he's taking liberty or self-government down to its most elemental form, which is to say the individual human being. And I guess what your point is that he's wanting to see a minimum threshold
for them, right? Because they are still humans. And he says the trajectory of what Douglas is saying is finally to eliminate, to take humanity away from the slaves, right? I could read the passage from that first debate where he does sort of say things that we might recoil from a little bit, because he's still got some racism there, right? But it also balances it out, right? So I'm not sure this is the best passage, but he says, what he says, I have no purpose to introduce political and social equality between the white and the black races. But I hold that notwithstanding all this, there is no reason in the world why the Negro is not entitled to all the natural rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I hold that he is as much entitled to these as the white man. And he says the same thing earlier. He says something like, I'm not interested in legalizing intermarriage between the races, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm in favor of enslaving them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so Douglas really refuses to address the question of the morality of slavery. And Lincoln makes a very powerful point about that, he says, look, by Douglas's logic, there's nowhere that we can really discuss or hash out the question of slavery. And this is in the sixth debate. And again, for you, the paragraph begins, I will now say.
Okay.
And this is Lincoln. And incidentally, the structure of these debates, should have commented on this earlier, but you would have the one speaker begin, and he'd go for a while, and then the other speaker would respond. And that response would be even longer than the first speaker, because after his lengthy response, the original speaker would have a very brief response to the response. So you had these three parts, with the largest part being the middle one.
But equal time slots allowed to both. Net
time. That's right.
So like an hour for one, then an hour and a half for the response, and then a half hour for a response to the response. Rebuttal, I guess.
And when you're talking the language of hours, that's exactly right. These would go on for several hours. I mean, if we were to do page count, it's just astounding how sophisticated these talks are and how lengthy, and they'll address many different points, political, moral, social, even personal, within the context of making one large argument. Right. So they would presume a kind of astounding attention span on the part of the listeners that is very foreign to our experience of politics.
And our experience of political debates now, right? Certainly in terms of magnitude of the presentation.
So anyway, here's Lincoln talking about Douglas's non-approach to the real question, the moral question of slavery. He says, you, Douglas, say it is wrong, but don't you constantly object to anybody else saying so? Right? So in other words, it's not as though Douglas is just a die-hard proponent of slavery. Continues, do you, Douglas, not constantly argue that this is not the right place to oppose it? You say it must not be opposed in the free states because slavery is not here. It must not be opposed in the slave states because it is there. It must not be opposed in politics because that will make a fuss. It must not be opposed in the pulpit because it is not religion. Then where is the place to oppose it? There is no suitable place to oppose it. And so that's a powerful way in which Lincoln is really addressing his listeners and getting them to understand, look, if you're going to go Douglas's way, then there will never be any opportunity to really address the question of slavery.
He even says something like, Douglas says, look, the Dred Scott decision, Supreme Court decision, has been made. It's settled. No one can talk trash about it. The whole matter of slavery as regards the federal government has been eliminated now by the Supreme Court. And so we can only speak respectfully of it, right, as the supreme law of the land. And that's the end of it. He constantly accuses Lincoln of wanting to stir up even violence is in reaction to it. And Lincoln's constantly protesting, not talking about a violent insurrection or something like that in reaction to the Dred Scott decision. I'm talking about working to overturn that decision legally, right? And enacting other laws that might help lead to the decision being revisited and overturned.
And that's a really interesting point in terms of Lincoln's platform, that he he admittedly is against the Dred Scott decision.
Yeah.
Like this, again, as you say, the highest court in the land
Yeah.
has come up with this law, and Lincoln opposes it, and he does so at least partly on the grounds that it defies what you might say that is the deeper law of the land, which is ultimately found in the Constitution and the principles in the Declaration.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that there's an internal consistency that Lincoln thinks the Dred Scott decision has violated.
Yeah, he thinks it's a wrong decision. He doesn't think it should be violated because he doesn't like the conclusion, but he thinks that if the job of the Supreme Court was to decide whether laws are consistent with the Constitution, right, he thinks it made a mistake here, right, and is ignoring what the underlying principles of the Constitution and therefore the Declaration even, right? Yeah. So he just thinks it was a bad Supreme Court decision, right? And those do happen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I continue in that same passage you were reading? I thought it was pretty remarkable how he goes on shortly after where you read, where he says, so I say again, this is probably about 6 lines underneath where you read, I say again that in regard to the arguments that are made when Judge Douglas says he don't care whether slavery is voted up or down, whether he means that as an individual expression of sentiment or only as a sort of statement of his views on national policy. It's alike true to say that he can thus argue logically if he don't see anything wrong in slavery, right? But he cannot say so logically if he admits that slavery is wrong. He cannot say that he would as soon see a wrong voted up as voted down. When Judge Douglas says that whoever or whatever community wants slaves, they have a right to have them, he's perfectly logical if there is nothing wrong in the institution. But if you admit that it is wrong, he cannot logically say that anybody has a right to do wrong. When he says that slave property and horse and hog property are alike to be allowed to go into the territories upon the principle of equality, he is reasoning truly if there is no difference between them as property. But if one is property held rightfully and the other is wrong, then there is no equality between right and wrong, so that, turn it any way you can, in all the arguments sustaining the democratic policy, and in that policy itself, there is a careful studied exclusion of the idea that there is anything wrong in slavery. Let us understand this. I am not just here saying that I am not just here trying to prove that we are right and they are wrong. I have been stating where we and they stand and trying to show what is the real difference between us. And now I say that whenever we can get the question distinctly stated, can get all these men who believe that slavery is in some of these respects wrong to stand and act with us in treating it as a wrong, then and not until then, I think we will in some way come to an end of this slavery agitation. That's the end of that speech, right? So saying the real question here, right, is whether or not you think slavery is an indifferent institution, or can you admit that it's wrong, right, morally wrong, right? And he has darndest trouble getting Douglas to answer the question, even though he seems to think it's widespread opinion, even among people in the South, that slavery is wrong, but it's established, right? And Douglas won't quite say that, right? He almost gives the kind of line you used to hear from politicians. I don't know if you hear it anymore, but they would say that they're personally opposed to abortion, right? But they don't think it should be illegal or something like that, right? But
Joe Biden.
Yeah, himself, right? A Catholic, no less. But yeah, so it seems like Lincoln, and this sort of comes back to your original question, the real heart of the issue is what do we think about slavery? Set aside exactly what the policy is going to be going forward, right? And what the decisions of the Supreme Court or acts of Congress have actually settled. What do we finally think about the moral status of slavery, of holding a race in slavery, right?
Yeah, and you can't pretend that that's an invalid question because the whole reason for these debates is ultimately the fact of slavery, right? The fact that you have things like the Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott decision, all of which are issues having to do or decisions made on the basis of the presence of slavery or its undesirability.
Yeah.
And so to try and pretend that the question of whether it's a good or not, the question of whether slavery is right or wrong, isn't an important question.
Yeah, and
is
shouldn't
really,
even be settled at or spoken about in a federal context, right?
Yeah.
You can talk about it locally, right? That state over there, or that territory over there, they could work out that question, make their decisions, but we at the federal level don't talk about that. And Douglas is saying, don't talk about that, Mr. Lincoln, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting that both of these characters have union or the union
Yeah.
as their ultimate end in some way.
Preservation of the Union, yeah.
Right? They both seem to think. I mean, Lincoln very clearly thinks that there's no way to preserve the Union with slavery.
Yeah, with
ultimately,
slavery.
right?
Yeah.
That the house divided against itself cannot stand.
Yeah.
Right? That's his kind of platform position. But Douglas, he really thinks, or seems to,
Yeah.
that Lincoln is trying to or coming close to forcing the issue of civil war.
Yeah.
And that Douglas is saying, look, states' rights, they've been a thing since the founding, right?
Yeah.
We had the Confederation
Yeah.
to begin with. But then even when we formed into a union, we formed the Constitution, there's this hierarchy whereby in the middle of that, you've got the state government as an important part of political life in this country, and that we don't need to change that. And Douglas's position here is simply a maintaining
Yeah.
of a kind of state sovereignty when it comes to these issues, and that's the way we've had our union, and that's what we're going to continue with.
Yeah, he's saying Lincoln is by electing him as your senator and certainly as your president, it's going to just rock the boat. So Douglas wants to maintain a certain status quo, almost like the spirit of the Missouri Compromise, right? In the sense of compromising and allowing a certain amount of slavery to grow alongside a certain allowed amount of non-slave holding territories. Just so that it's sort of like kicking a can down the road, right? Say, well, I mean, he's not saying we'll deal with that question someday about the morality or immorality of slavery, but he's basically saying we're not going to deal with it now, and maybe we should consider the question as foreclosed by the Dred Scott decision itself, right? So that you work out your morality on your territorial level or state level, right? But there shouldn't be a consideration of this moral question at the national level, right? And he's saying, as long as we follow that principle, the South isn't going to angle for war or secession, right? And that he's got a point there. I mean, it surely seems to be the case that there would be that the Civil War would be less likely, right? If you're just trying to let the slave territories grow, I guess. But
Yeah, and maybe, and some of this has to do with the fact that, again, in the not too distant past, you've had these territories coming in without slavery. Like California was a big one.
yeah.
And so there are those in Douglas's camp, Douglas's party, who see this as a kind of threat.
Yeah.
Right? That maybe the tide of things is going in the direction of restricting slavery.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what's appealing about the Dred Scott decision, because it goes beyond, in some way, a kind of pure Douglas position, which is, well, leave it up to the states. It's going beyond that to say, oh, you actually can't prohibit slavery.
Hands off. Yeah. It's a good point. I hadn't really thought about the fact that California really was a territory at this point, or at least it was on its way, right? So we're 1858 or something like that, right? Here we go. So there's already the beginnings of this, Douglas speaks of this sort of this fear of the southern states of being boxed in, right, to the west, right? They've got the Atlantic Ocean, right, as one border, and they want to be able to spread, right, westward. And California is already there saying, not this far.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So he could see that almost a literal horizon, right? On the horizon, this threat to the growth, especially if he's serious when he says that slavery is a bit like locusts. It has to grow. It has to go to a new territory to sustain itself, right? That imagery he gave of what you want to do boxing the South in, Mr. Lincoln, is inevitably going to involve killing people of the South and even the slaves, right? Whereas he's implying that no, they have to spread, right? It's like a version of manifest destiny for slavery, right? Where it always has a claim on growing further west, and you'd think all the way as far as the Pacific Ocean, but California's drawn a line in the sand, I guess. There,
Yeah, and Lincoln's keen to this, that this is not an issue like, do we want to drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road?
Yeah.
But it's got, because it's a moral issue, there's an appetite behind it, whether for or against.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see, on the one hand, a movement toward the rejection of slavery, as in the case of California and its territory. But then on the other hand, among those who do want this, there's a kind of reach beyond in the wrong direction. And that's exemplified, for example, in the Dred Scott decision and in powerful adherence to it. Like, well, Douglas himself, whether that's because of his personal convictions or because he's standing for others who want to see this.
Yeah, right, yeah, so it doesn't know limits. The thanks to the Dred Scott decision, there shouldn't be a north-south limitation, right? So even if there's California in the way, you could hook up north, right? It's the sort of thing that just naturally grows, right?
Yeah, and you can see some of the reason for that on the basis of the fact that it has to do with economy and wealth.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. Do you think this is right? I mean, I struggle with how to think about this exactly, but it seems like there's a concern. Let me organize my thoughts for a second here. Is it right that there's something about slavery itself that just, besides the fact that it wants to grow, I guess here's what I'm saying. You can cut maybe the previous 5 seconds, but Lincoln seems to kind of think that we need this thing. He doesn't want a war to start, right? But he does think that we're rapidly approaching the day that slavery needs to go. He doesn't set a timetable. He doesn't say that we need to aim to have no more slave states in the next 10 years. He's very clear about saying, I don't think we should mess with slavery where it exists in the states. But he thinks the founders thought slavery was on its way out naturally, and they were ashamed, at least most of them were ashamed of it, right? And even the ones that were slave holding were embarrassed by it. I keep thinking about the fact that Jefferson, in his original draft of the Declaration, said something about the horrible slave trade, right? And he himself, I think, was a slaveholder, right? So you see that tension sort of embodied within himself, right? Unless you think he just wasn't being intellectually honest in his drafting of the Declaration, which I doubt that he was being dishonest. But I guess what I'm thinking is, at the founding, they really thought this thing will die of itself or can be helped die sometime soon. And Lincoln makes the point that had it not been for the invention of the cotton gin, right, that this thing probably would have died out already.
Yeah.
And it made the cotton picking much more efficient. So I think one of Lincoln's interests here is to see that this thing wants to spread, and yet so that means that to respect the founders' intentions and even their real deepest hopes, to abide by the Declaration principle about freedom and rights, that we need to help it along by forbidding it from the territories, right? And maybe doing anything else that you could prevent it from growing in any way. Not actively destroy it, right? But accommodate it to the extent you can without allowing it to grow. Because you're granting it's a moral evil, right? And the founders wanted it to go. We all in our heart of hearts know that it should go. At least that's what Lincoln thinks. And but you don't want to violently, in any sense of the word, violently injure the southern states who have an economy that's built around slavery. So you have to sort of gently prevent it from spreading and gently help it die or transition away from slavery. Yeah, does that seem right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Also because of the fact that even Lincoln's rhetoric there, as history comes to bear out, even within the next couple of years, is almost too mild.
Yeah.
In the sense that so much damage has been done. I think that the position as you described it reveals the degree to which the damage has been done already through the fact that, well, partly through the fact that the founding documents weren't more bold on this issue, right? Because since the evil in fact was allowed to remain, you end up getting the Dred Scott decision. You end up getting these political movements and economical ones that make it a thing again. Perhaps unbeknownst to the founders. As a result of which, now it's established in a way that they didn't foresee, and in a way that is a massive presence in the country.
Much harder to eradicate now, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's right. It sort of reminds me of that. Well, sometimes what you hear is sort of two conflicting principles. On the one hand, law teaches people morality, right? And good law teaches good morality. Bad law teaches bad morality. On the other hand, there's another expression that, how's it go? Politics is downstream from culture, something like that. That in other words, the laws, right, and the desire for certain laws is an effect of what the community wants, what the people want. And there can seem like there's a kind of tension there. I think they're both true in different ways, but you're sort of illustrating that the sort of the neglect of trying to put limits on slavery early on has led to the law teaching people that those allowances have sort of taught the culture a certain way, formed the culture a certain way, institutionalized slavery in a deeper way. In other words, I think Lincoln is probably right when he says the founders, even the Southern founders, were embarrassed in some way about slavery. Right?
The language of the documents certainly suggests that.
And the Northerners were ashamed of it, right? They were stronger on that. But at the time of the Declaration and of the Constitution, there was a real ambivalence in the South. But by this time, in 1858, I think there's much more of the South see it as either neutral, as Douglas seems to imply. It's indifferent, right? It's like putting on your right shoe before your left shoe, or left shoe before your right shoe. Or they even are in favor of it. There will be apologists for slavery as about it being either good for the slave, the Africans, right? Or perhaps even the, sanctifying of them in various ways. So you have there's sort of propagandist on that side that sort of makes the culture, the law has led the culture to be a certain way, right? And that culture has led to new laws being being in the same direction, right? And it seems like you have to sort of think about how you strike that balance, right? So Lincoln's talking about we do want to change the laws that make it more restrictive for the spread of this evil, this moral evil. But we also want to be very cautious and prudent about the fact that the culture of the people, right, is wedded to slavery in some deep way, right? And that's Southerners. And so you have to accommodate that. You can't simply replace a horrible law with a good law if it's going to be people aren't ready to receive it, right?
Yeah. I wonder if part of why slavery has grown, aside from just the mere fact that populations grow over time.
And the cotton gin.
Right. Is that when you look to the founding documents, on the one hand, it's right what Lincoln points out, that that even the blacks are referred to as persons, right? And that all humans are created equal and so on. So you've got that language that supports Lincoln. But that language tends more toward the abstract. When you get to particular concrete matters of action, you have something like this 3/5 notion.
Right.
For a black person, counts as kind of 3/5 of a white person, and so and that has to do with something. That has to do with concrete decisions and actions in human existence, and so there's a way in which, when it comes to law, it's the latter that's always going to impress itself
Yeah.
on our minds and our ways of thinking and acting.
Yeah.
Not the more abstract ideal talk.
Yeah.
And so that might be part of where you see, sort of effectively speaking, more of an evil
Yeah.
in the language of the founding.
Yeah.
Even though at the level of principle, it's capable of self-rectification.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's got that all created equal, right? And endowed by their creator with these rights.
Yeah.
You think this is right? I've heard this, and I think this is true, that part of that 3/5 notion came from the South because they wanted to get representation out of their
I think
slaves.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, the Northerners were saying, no, they don't count for your representation. Well, they're zeros, right? Right? Even though the
Ironically, yeah.
Northerners were saying those are human beings and they shouldn't be enslaved, right? So you see both sides wanting to have it both ways, right? You see the conflict there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the results of this,
Yeah.
right? As we mentioned before, Douglas, and maybe many forget this, but
Yeah.
Douglas is the winner,
Yeah.
at least in terms of the immediate game they're
Yeah.
playing.
The Senate. Yeah.
Yeah. Why? I mean, there could be 1,000, surely are, historical and cultural, geographic, and personal reasons for why Douglas won, and we can't go into all that. But just going from these texts themselves, is there something in them we can see as to why it could have made sense that Douglas would be the one to win in the short term?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something you were saying earlier. So they're both want to preserve the Union, but I think Douglas maybe made a better argument in some ways that he as the senator, is safer for the Union, that Lincoln is a danger because Lincoln is outright saying things that the status quo must change. That even if Lincoln's saying gradually, right? Even if he's saying that we're not going to interfere with slavery as it exists in the states, right? Southern states. He is saying that this needs to be on a trajectory such that if you will, the free states are going to win over the slave-holding states. And that sounds dangerous, again, even though Lincoln's saying, I will not do anything that will try to lead to a war. He is saying we will do things on the edges, if you will, pertaining to slavery, that will restrict it. And Douglas is saying, even if he's not right about this, and even if Lincoln's argument that what Douglas is really saying is that slavery must spread, must become bigger, and there's no reason why a state that's a free state shouldn't become a slave-holding state. Even if Lincoln's right in that argument, what Douglas's official line is I will do nothing to strengthen the North or the South. We will try to maintain this balance, right? And so there'd be no motivation for the South to secede or any sort of war to start, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Lincoln's got sort of proposing rolling the dice a little bit, right? And Douglas is saying, I'm not going to touch the dice at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. And even in terms of Lincoln's opposition to something like the Dred Scott decision,
Yeah.
right? That's a bold move,
Yeah.
right? That I'm going to oppose the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And his whole party is created in reaction to that
Yeah.
to that decision. It's not just some sort of a view that he has at the moment, and maybe he'll soften over time. But it's his party's defining principle in some ways, and they nominate him because of that. Yeah.
So you could say that Lincoln's stance really involves a project,
Yeah.
right? Like you say, it
Long
has
term.
to do with ultimate a kind of rejection of slavery,
Yeah.
and what's that going to look like for the country, and how will that be accomplished? But also an overturning of Dred Scott, and what's that going to mean? And what are the steps taken to do this, all of this, and preserve the Union?
Yeah.
Whereas, there's maybe this simplicity, kind of apparent ease with Douglas's position, which is, look, states' rights. You decide as you will. That's always been the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the kind of principle that we're based on. So
Yeah.
let's just go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say that Douglas wants, both of them want martial peace, that is, no war, right? But Douglas wants what he thinks will be peace in the social discourse, right? By basically demanding silence about this question.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas Lincoln saying...
That's a Marshall piece of a different sort.
Yeah, right, yeah. Politics is war by other means or something like that, right? Whereas Lincoln is saying, no, we have to keep having this out. We have to, this is the issue of our day, right? And we have to keep arguing about it, trying to persuade each other, right? Not go to war with each other, but persuade each other, right? And maybe people just want to be left alone, don't want to have to think about these hard questions and have these hard arguments.
Yeah. That's a powerful statement from Lincoln's perspective, as you were just describing it, as to the importance of politics.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity that people have to address evils without a clear sight as to what the future is going to hold.
Yeah, right.
But that this is what we need to do for the good.
Yeah, and doing it as rational human beings, which means without picking up arms.
Yes.
Right? But by engaging each other's minds and trying to, one side persuade the other, or they reach a common understanding, right? A common understanding that's not just, I'm going to take my marbles and go over here, and you take your marbles and go over there, which is what Douglas is proposing, but some sort of a meeting of the minds that allows for a reasonable sort of recognition of each other's needs or goods, but might require sacrifices of each other.
It's very well put, especially as we inch closer to July 4th and our 250th anniversary.
Yeah, right.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, John.